Hey everybody, welcome to this quick video tutorial. I'm going to show you really quickly how to use street art painting techniques to create really cool spacescapes in Adobe Sketch. So the way this works is pretty simple. You're just going to need a couple of different tools built in. You already know about the ink pens that are located here. You probably use those quite a bit. Another one that's helpful is the pastel tool and the brush tool. These are just basically to create different textures. They're not something that is needed necessarily. You can actually substitute either of these for any of the other tools you might use. The one that's necessary, however, is the spray painting tool. This is a mock-up of a spray painting technique that you may have seen if you go to a big city during the summer. And I'm going to go ahead and start by doing the first step, which is to lay the background. Now, what's pretty cool about this method is that you can, the first thing you want to do is you can actually create what looks like, you don't want just a flat black background. You want nebulas and other things star trails, Milky Way, ring galaxy kind of things. And the way you do that is by basically taking your spray painting tool, dialing down the flow to I'd say about 70 or so, and selecting a couple of fun colors and just kind of putting some of that color out there. I'm going to switch to do a little bit of, I'm going to do some green, like that, a little bit up there, and then I'm going to do a little bit of yellow, just down in the corner here, maybe a little bit over there. So that's the first step. Now what you're going to do is actually create the foreground of the spray effect, and I'm going to dial up just slightly, and I'm going to essentially just randomly spray it. Now I don't want this whole thing to be completely dark. No reason for that. It helps with the contrast of the planets later on, and so what I'm basically just going to do is start adding different layers of, just try to fill it in random ways. The darkness, it can be very dark in some places, not as dark in others. You don't necessarily need to be like a completely crazy about if there's any white, because again, this just adds like a more dynamic background, as you'll see a little bit later. So there's a little bit of that. Now what we're going to do is actually create the planet. So I'm going to switch to a new sketch layer. And we're going to start by creating or adding a background, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going to be building the planets backwards. So I'm going to dial up the size. I'm going to dial up the flow. The way that you do your planets is you essentially think of the color scheme you want to use, like a warm color scheme or a cool color scheme. And you start with the lightest color first, with the heaviest flow. And I have a quick start guide in this whole thing that you can use as well. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, and I'm gonna start building my planet, and I'm gonna create as round a shape as I can at the size of the planet that I want. And again, you can adjust this because this is a new layer. You just want to kind of fill it in fairly dark in the background. Doesn't have to be perfectly round, doesn't have to be perfectly filled in, but usually you want this base layer to be pretty solid. And I use the ink pen just because I can control the size a little bit and try to make it round-ish. The planet will always be smaller than the shape that you create here, so make sure it's about the same size you want and try to get it as round as possible. Okay, that's step one. Then what you're going to do is select the next color, and so I'm going to go with a little bit of a tangerine here, and you're going to dial the flow down by about 20% each time, and that's going to preserve the it's going to make sure that all of the colors of the planet come through. So I'm going to just go ahead and add some random stripes here. There you go. Now I'm going to switch to some of my texture tools. In this case, I'm going to go with my pastel. And again, I'm going to dial the layer down. So I was at 80 before. I'll go to about 60 or so now. And I'm going to just do some random. This is just going to add some random texture again. And then finally, I'm going to go to my ink brush. Choose my darkest color, my red, the lightest flow, which in this case is going to be about 40. Make it a little bit bigger. So you can clearly see all of the different colors here. But we're not quite done yet because we need to add some shadow. So I'm going to dial back my spray paint tool. I'm going to make sure that it's about in the 70s is probably fine for this. And I have to decide where in my galaxy my sun is going to be, because when you're designing multiple planets, they all have to obey the light and dark laws of spheres. I'm going to make the right side the dark side, so I'm basically just going to darken it like I would a sphere, right? And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, this time with white, same way. And what you're going to have is, that's basically how we create our planet, at least the background of it. Now I'm going to use this shape right here, which should be boop, round, to cut out the planet. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit more, so I have a little bit more control over my eraser, and I'm going to cut out my planet's shape. And there you go. And then what I just got to do is kind of go and erase around, get rid of all of this extra. It's kind of helpful to shut off the background while you're doing this in some cases, so the darker side especially. Can make it a little bit bigger of an eraser tool. There we go. Get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. Now if I was doing this, I think I just may have cut off part of my planet there. If I was doing this for real, I'd be a little bit more careful, but just to make this video a little bit shorter, I'm going to go ahead and just go a little bit crazy, just try to get it done for you folks. So you can kind of really see the dark light contrast. It really looks spherical. Go ahead and get rid of the rest of this. Don't need to do it all perfectly, and I bring this back. You can see that I missed, oopsie, see that I missed some spots there. I can go ahead and get rid of them, but again, like I'm not, you know, if I was doing this for real, I'd be a lot more careful. But there we go. And then I can move around this planet, try to find a place where the contrast feels a lot better. Like that one right there is pretty good. I can make it a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller if I want. Pretty cool. So there's that. Now if you want to add stars, you go back to one of your pen tools, and you start off pretty large, 21 for the ink pen, and you just make some dots. Around, remember, not in front of the planet. And then I'm dialing it down a little bit, trying to add as many perfect circles as I can. If the pen slips a little bit and you get kind of the weird ones, do a little bit more. I would, of course, do, in real life, the entire size, the entire background if I was doing this for real, but I'm not. It's okay. Yeah. There's my stars, and then if I wanted to add a comet, I decide where I want to put my comet. I'm going to put it over here. I dial the pen tool down to the smallest, finest size I can, and essentially I'm just going to create lines from a single point, radiating out like that, longer in the middle, kind of just like that. See that? And eventually you do this enough, you're going to get a really cool looking comet. You can go as long as you want with that tail. Just try to make it straightish. Doesn't have to be perfect. Here we go. You can color it in a little bit more up at the front. The head of the comet should be pretty solid, as should the core, I think, is what, maybe it's, I don't know if that's actually what it's called, the core part of the tail. And there's your, oops, and then there's your pretty sweet comet. So that essentially is how you create these scenes.